I'm thrilled to invite Steph L. Clark to give a talk for us about their opus Rooftop Cop, their 5-year retrospective. As many of you know, Steph is a video game artist, an educator, and one of the instructors here at Game Center and also wider NYU, as well as a curator. They're a co-founder at Babycastles Gallery, which is an organization here in New York, a nonprofit organization in New York, Brooklyn, that kind of focuses on showing contemporary independent games, as well as promoting and hosting marginalized developers and their works. And Steph has a myriad of beautiful video games, that one of which they're going to talk about today, Rooftop Cop, that focuses a lot on ideas such as absurdism, climate fiction, death positivity. You can also see this in a lot of their other games, like Witchball, which was the most recent release, sort of a sports-like game, and Lawrence as well, I think a very deep, moving vignette piece. And generally has been a very, big, steady, radical force of good here in the world of game making and education, games community in general. And I've been really kind of fortunate to find sort of an art crush in Steph and a friend really early in my career as a game maker. And, kind of growing up, seeing their work and hearing them talk about their process and their kind of like this relentless pursuit of making work that is going to unnerve people and wake people up has been really important to me. And I'm really excited to have you guys here to kind of experience a little bit of that. This experience of being in a sort of adjacent classroom as Steph, hearing them talk about their process and hearing their thoughts as a very brilliant artist and sort of brutal critic. And I'm excited to hear them break it down for all of us here at Game Center. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Steph to the podium and their work, Rooftop Cop. Thank you.
Wow, hello. Am I doing this mic thing right? This is fun. Okay. Okay. So, well, that was a pretty good introduction. I don't know if I need to go to it any further. I graduated from the MFA program almost 6 years ago, so this was my master's thesis, so I'm happy to revisit it. First of all, I want to thank Winnie for these posters. They're really good. I kind of want to clap for them. I just gave Winnie some of my old drawings, and she made these. They're really good. Okay, so it's probable that you have not played these games before. They're available on the internet, but I do want to sort of first do like kind of a rundown of each of them. There's 5 separate games in this collection. So the first thing I want to kind of get out of the way is like a real quick, just show you what they're about maybe. They're at varying levels of like playability and success. They're the first video games that I ever made, so but they think they hold up pretty well. So, the 5 of them. So the first one that I want to mention is called Proud History. So in this game, you have this kind of top-down, really zoomed-out view. You play like this little officer kind of wandering around the center here, and you assign like arbitrary numbers to people, and you collect those numbers by putting your hands on those people. It's extremely abstract. It's inspired by stop and frisk, which is this invasive racist policing tactic. Bloomberg is still around for some reason, so I'm sure this is a familiar thing to us now. It keeps coming up. Originally it was a 2-player game. We'll talk more about that later. The second, is it going to play? Yeah, okay. The second game in the collection, kind of following this timeline. There's not really dates to these things, so they just kind of like, it made sense that they would go in this order. So Capture the Flag for 1. So the title basically suggests what you should be doing, right? At the time, I think I was really interested in the title doing like all the lifting. So you slowly, really slowly walk across the top of this glacier, and you get the flag, and then you bring it back to the other side, and you just keep doing that, and you can sort of make out from the video that the glacier is kind of melting a little bit. It's like kind of moving down. The ice is shifting around, real slow. The third game in the collection is called the Data Mines. So it's the most game-like, I would say, probably most video gamey. So you sort of crash through the ceilings in this apartment building, and you grab miscellaneous items from people's floors and things like that. So you need enough stuff, you need to be carrying enough stuff to fall through the floor again into the next apartment, but not carry too much stuff that the bag crushes you. So it's this kind of like, you have to keep throwing things out the window and stuff like that, right? So this game was primarily inspired by civil forfeiture, which is just police can just take things from you. If they say that it's related to a crime, you don't have to be charged for a crime, they can just take stuff. Still exists. I think over $20 billion worth of stuff has been taken from people this way in the last decade. Not a great policy. All right, so the fourth game in the collection was actually the first one that I started on. It's called God Bless Everyone. And in this, you slowly float through a city on a raft. You have these little characters that you can move around. You select them and walk them around and things like that. You can use junk to expand the raft however you want. And I don't know if we'll get here in the little video, but eventually buildings kind of show up. And if your raft clips them, it breaks, and so you knock chunks off the raft. You can kind of see it better on those screens, I guess, a little bit. There's debris floating in the water, and there are people hanging out in the buildings. They can come down, walk around on your raft, or you can climb up on the buildings and grab things, or people can just stay on the buildings. The camera just sort of follows the raft along. Doesn't particularly matter what the people are doing. So it has these RTS mechanics, right? So you're selecting characters and moving them around. And at the time when I was working on it, Frank Lance refused to stop calling it Stark Raft. I don't know. He's not here, so we're gonna make Frank jokes. So the final one, Palace of the Organizer. So at this point, the world is just a beach. It's kind of all that's left. There's the ocean is mostly jellyfish and artificial sweetener and microplastics or whatever, those things that don't go away. And so basically all there is left to do is arrange sticks on the beach. So you can you walk real slowly around, grab sticks and put them different places. There's a fax machine in the back, you can kind of see it, that prints out inspirational material for you, example drawings, just sort of stick arrangements that you could try if you wanted to, maybe. But it occasionally it jams, and you have to go back and unjam it, and so it'll keep printing more stuff for you. All right, so that's a real quick overview of the 5 different sort of pieces to the collection. So Rooftop Cop imagines a police cult, essentially, right? As the surviving remnant of human civilization. And so what does that mean? Why? What do police have to do with environmental degradation, things like that? So the world currently exists under a system of global capitalism, right? You can't avoid that. That's just kind of the dominant system. People complain about it all the time. Anytime something sucks, they're just capitalism. It's just the way it is. But what is actually the purpose of all this suffering, right? So I'm going to say that both police and the climate catastrophe are the crowning achievements of this system. These are the lasting legacies of global capitalism, these two things. And maybe that statement seems obvious to you, maybe not. But I want to try to get at why I think these forces like share a genesis, like a common, where they come from. And I want to be fairly quick about it, but I want to be really thorough too. So we're going to start with some basics. What is capitalism? How does this work? This is, for my comrades, this is a phone break for you. Also, excuse my crude diagrams. I'm trying to appeal to like multiple generations here, so you'll see. So all things are made, right? So you look around and there's all this stuff. We can kind of agree on that, right? So all these things are made by someone somewhere. So here's a thing, and it's a good thing, useful thing, which is important. And it's made of materials. Yeah, maybe not those exact materials, but we're close enough. And people act on those materials with tools and machines, right? So all these things are finite. So the materials get used up, right? Tools wear down, machines break. Human life is finite, right? You only get so much time on Earth, then it's over. So all these things kind of run out. And each thing, so this thing has some value, right? But where does the value come from? Well, materials are involved in the creation. Those go in, right? So that's some of the value. You can account for waste and mistakes and all that stuff. Just, it's all in there. Tools wear out over time, and machines break and stuff like that. So that value goes in there. So if that hammer can make 9 chairs before it breaks, then 1/9 of every hammer is in each chair. And ultimately, some person has to operate or oversee these tools, right? So, like we said before, human life is finite, so that life transfers in. There's that one. And that's the labor part. So things get value this way, right? So the process imbues them, which is it's people acting on or with the earth, right? Okay, so here's a thing, and it has value. Let's say that value is 100. I don't know. It's an easy round number for us. We'll just give it a number. And maybe someone is like, okay, I want to buy that thing. I like it. I would like to have this thing. There he is. He really wants that thing. And so you can imagine. Okay, so you got to get it there, right? So you can add some value. Now it's 120 for you got to get the thing there, shop maintenance, whatever. So yeah, it's increased. The value kind of goes up. And yeah, you can imagine that this person pays for it in a way that makes sense, right? So it replaces everything. So the material cost is covered, the tools are replaced, and the worker's time is covered. It's all there. Maybe the shop guy can swindle a bit and take some for himself, and maybe it's 160 and he keeps the extra 40, pockets it, something like that. That's fine, whatever. Or maybe they keep that for a rainy day fund. I don't know. They can do whatever they want. But if we go too far down this path, where people are paid for their work, we'll end up with communism, and that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about capitalism. So, back to capitalism. How do I make money out of this process, right? That part. Mr. Moneybags wants to accumulate value. That's the point, right? You want to get more forever. You want to turn your money into more money. So how do you do this? Well, you can start by owning things. It's a good place to start. You can just have stuff already. So outside of chattel slavery, you can't own the people, but you can own the tools and materials, because people have to use tools and materials to make stuff. So these tools and materials are constant. They must be acted upon. The humans are variable. They do the acting, right? So machines have to be replaced, and you always need more materials. But with the variable capital, there's wiggle room, right? And you can keep the wiggle room for yourself. You can pay people less than the value they give you, and that is surplus value. If you do this enough times to enough people, that's your capital. There it is. He's got a lot of it. So capital is accumulated human life, right? So a capitalist is someone who hoards the congealed, unpaid lives of other people. So you might think, well, it's sort of obvious that, like, the workers don't really need this guy, right? He just has this stuff. They don't really need him. Why don't they just, what's the word? Starts with an S. So let's make sure to write that down. So why don't they just take this stuff for themselves, and then they don't need this guy, right? But what keeps them from owning those things? What keeps them from taking it? Does anyone have a guess? Yeah, the police. Gosh, I love this Elon GIF. GIF, sorry. So, sorry, this is my most gratuitous slide, I promise. So I say that Rooftop Cop is about a police cult or whatever, and people kind of laugh, and it is supposed to be funny in some ways. But for your consideration, here are some remarks that the Attorney General made to the Fraternal Order of Police last summer. For example, zero tolerance for resisting police, comply first. What stands between chaos and carnage on one hand and the civilized and tranquil society we all yearn for is the thin blue line of law enforcement. You are the ones manning the ramparts? Law enforcement is fighting a different type of war, an unrelenting, never-ending fight. Final victory is never in sight. Does anyone remember this commercial that was supposed to air during the Super Bowl? Yeah, so the purpose of police is to protect property. Police are not a response to crime. They are a response to crowds. Public demonstrations, strikes, riots, slave rebellions, whatever. But this is so ridiculous. I can't believe they built that. How did we get here? Like, what even are police? Like, where do they come from? Where does this exist? Because they didn't always, right? It's not like a thing we started with. In older systems, like feudalism, class strata was like a little simpler, right? So you had nobles who owned things, and serfs who didn't own things. There's a higher degree of mutual obligation within these classes. But as city populations grew, people found ways to make money by already having money. Usury had been around for a long time, which is, loaning money to get more money back. Jesus' major platform was that this was an evil practice. But anyway, we're going to focus on Europe here because I think they're the main culprits. City populations are growing, and people are trying to make money. They're trying to turn their money into more money. The middle class starts to exist around this time, like 1,000 to like 1,300, something like that. And shortly after that, people start sailing to the Americas and looting it, right? We all know this. Who funds these expeditions, right? No wonder. So who's making money off of the looting? This looting increased the holdings of these baby capitalists exponentially, which is the point. And So the word like bourgeoisie just means city dweller, but like at this point, it's like an entire social class, like distinct from workers. Obviously, there's like lots of looting taking place around the globe. But while we're here, a quick aside on the United States as like an independent nation, which is unique. So the U.S. got like a huge head start in as like a capitalist empire, right? Because remember these two columns that we outlined earlier, the variable and the constant. The U.S. got both of them for free. They just for free. How clever! So all of the resources, all the resources, the land, the materials, things like that, were stolen from native populations, and all of the labor was stolen from black slaves. So there's your bootstraps. Yeah. So anyway, the losers in this like early capitalist situation had to subsist on wage labor, right? It's gonna work. And some of this labor involved the violent suppression of their fellow poor people, right? So things like hired thugs, like personal security, stuff like that. You've played video games, you know what a mercenary is. So violence as a means of control works exceptionally well on small groups of people. You can send some thugs to intimidate some people, right? Or like if there's some group that's getting too organized, you can murder their leader. It's going to scare them. It's a job that existed. But eventually, like the crowds got too big for this to work. I know it's crazy. In 1819, like over 50,000 people demonstrated in Manchester to demand like some parliamentary reforms, something like that. And the military were called in to sort of deal with this crowd situation, and they charged the crowd. Like 18 people die, and like hundreds are injured, right? And this has like the opposite effect, right? So it emboldens them, it gives them like more reasons to hate the people in power. So 10 years later, the London police are formed. Ooh, the first bobbies. The aim of the police being like the use of non-lethal force to manage and disperse crowds. So they want to avoid creating martyrs, right? But they still want to maintain this like useful mass intimidation stuff. Now over in the U.S. at the time, so in the first half of the 1800s, the population of New York City went from like 60,000, like 320,000 or something. It was crazy. It's a lot of people, and there were a lot of like labor demonstrations and rioting and stuff like that. So crime was generally handled by like the public watch. They had, just like neighborhood folks. They had some problems, but over this time period, the power and responsibility of this watch was like heavily expanded to deal with all these public demonstrations and things. And this led to the creation of the NYPD in 1845. I could not find a picture from then, so this is from a parade some decades later. It's kind of cute. But anyway, so this made the police a job. It made it active 24/7, and it gave it a chain of command modeled after the military. So the law is like a tool for shaping society, if you want to think of it that way. But because the police are uniquely empowered to wield the law, when and where they please, essentially, they're permanently corrupt. The power dynamic is out of balance by design, and this allows them to maintain their role as a force of intimidation for property owners. So we're not clobbering crowds. They act as like a dispersed form of surveillance, which ensures that the poor and working class maintain a level of fear that best suits or best serves the ruling class. So here's a homeless quilt that I found on Facebook. They just round up homeless people and steal their signs. They're super proud of that. This is from not that long ago. This is for fare evasion. They just put the cops there just in case you jump a turnstile. Not getting through those guys. Yeah, this is like East New York, J-turn. Tough job. So yeah, this gets into a lot of stuff that I'm not going to talk about because I don't have that much time, which is like the annihilation of public space, not just by the police, but through cars and ads and investment real estate. Public space is really important, especially to working class and poor, because it's where they hang out, it's where they demonstrate, it's where they're seen. And the police are just an occupying army, essentially. So you thought this was going to be about video games. Ursula Le Guin describes bad sci-fi, we're pivoting, as pure extrapolation. Does that make sense? You know, what if this, but forever? Yeah, she says the outcome seems almost inevitably to be cancer. So does the outcome of extrapolation. Strictly extrapolative works of science fiction generally arrive about where the Club of Rome arrives, but somewhere between the gradual extinction of human liberty and the total extinction of terrestrial life. The good sci-fi, presumably being something that like natural results stemming from extra-natural circumstances, right? So like a thought experiment. An example from her own writing, actually, this book, if I had to summarize the thought experiment, is like, given a planet with permanent global freezing temperatures and where humans have no sex differentiation, what happens? That's it, right? So there's a premise, and then the book sort of deals with that. So, Rooftop Cop, then, is bad sci-fi, right? It's just extrapolation. Extrapolation can be fun, you know. It's the first, you know, I'm not an advanced sci-fi writer or anything. People watch Black Mirror. Bad sci-fi is fun. So here's the thing. We've established that capitalism is accumulation for its own sake. There's no end in sight. Regulations and half measures for this sort of thing, they're just life support, essentially. And because it relies on exploitation, it will destroy itself, right? So eventually, all the exploited will be dead, destroyed, or displaced. There'll be no new variable capital to exploit. The system kind of eats itself from the inside. People have known this for like 150 years. This is climate change, essentially, right? It's the overexploitation of everything. It's the conclusion of capitalism. There's no way around that, really. It's a self-perpetuating machine with like one purpose. So, I mean, it's a common saying that it's like easier to envision the end of the world than the end of capitalism. You've probably heard this before. And yeah, it's pretty scary. I think we can agree on that. But who better to weather this monumental terror than the professionally afraid? Yeah, so if you're prone to jump scares and real deadly force, then maybe it's the world for you. What a playground. So, professionally afraid. So as I was working on these games, I was really interested in opaque systems, naturally, which is like what you can't know or don't know about the way that something works. Video games are really good at this, because it's basically what they are. There's a game from 2012 called Slave of God, and by Inkapar. And Inkapar releases the source for each game. And in Slave of God, basically the entire game exists on a single object in the middle of the dance floor, called Abdullah, which is servant of God, slave of God. I was pretty into this stuff at the time, like thinking of the video game as a complete object, not just like the part that the person experiences while they're playing it, like as a whole thing. I didn't release my source code or anything, but there is a lot of nonsense in some of the Rooftop Cop games. For example, in Proud History, there are internal flags for loitering and littering. Like, sometimes they just drop trash on the ground. There's multiple sprites for the trash. You can't see it. It keeps track of how long people have been standing in one place, so occasionally they're considered loitering, but it doesn't matter. Like, it never just shows up. It has no effect on what you do, but it is there. And I think the fact that it doesn't matter is kind of the point. Another example, real quick, is so general good practice, I would say, in programming is to delete or disable like objects that are not in use. Just get rid of them. Free up memory or whatever. So in Capture the Flag, for one, I purposely do not do this. I don't delete anything when it leaves the screen. It's my only physics game. This was my personal challenge to myself, was to make a physics game but not be funny. It's really hard to make a game with physics that's not funny. So anyway, there's like hundreds of tiny ice chunks in here, and they're all bumping into each other. The game like chugs. It's like 2 frames per second, if you're lucky. Maybe computers are better now. Maybe you can get 12 or something. But so the glacier falls apart. All these little ice chunks are bumping into each other, and they leave the screen, and they're still there, right? They're just out of mind. So in this way, I've noticed that most of my games, especially Rooftop Cop, resemble sculpture more than anything. In that they're not time limited in most cases. There's no gatekeeping, really. Things don't reveal themselves over time. It's just like one thing. You sort of walk up and like look at it for as long as you can stand to, and then you leave. Someone else walks up. So these are some photos from I wish I had better ones. Please document your work, everyone. So these are some photos from the installation piece that we did for the MFA Thesis show. Anyone who's been to the Magna building, maybe this room looks familiar to you. But so there's a lot of wood and cardboard and paper mache and stuff, and it was this whole cave system that you could walk through, and the games were placed in different spots, right? So here's kind of like they're both kind of gross, like in progress photos, but you kind of get it. It was like the whole cave was painted like sparkly purple or something. It looked pretty good. It's just really hard to take pictures of because it was so dark. Right, so this installation version of the game was sort of supposed to model this like tourist approach that sort of exists in just like the way that you played the games. So there's, here's a map of the room. You played the first game outside the room, and then you came in, and the second one, the one with the ice, Capture the Flag, was down this like long shelf tunnel thing. You had to like squint and like look. It was really hard to see. And then Data Mines was like in the middle, and it's kind of bigger screen. There's like a little shrine sort of thing on the side for God Bless Everyone. That's this sort of thing. I guess that one's you can see it better on that screen. Anyway. And then Palace of the Organizer was actually up on several stacked desks. So you climbed up on top of these desks. Nobody knew that they were desks. And you looked out kind of over top of the whole rest of the installation, and there's all this mylar and like silvery stuff, kind of like water. So anyway, that was kind of the idea, was that you approached the cave, you walked through it, you go up to the raft game, maybe you build some things, climb on some buildings or whatever, leave, someone else would come along, do the same thing. Each person not really knowing where the game had been before, just sort of attempting to learn the environment that they inherited and like make the best of it, I guess. So, kind of coming toward the end here. So maybe some of the students in the room can relate to this next bit. So when you first come to the Game Center, either as a BFA or an MFA, you're like exposed to like a lot of stuff right away. It's like a lot of, mid-century play theory, like introductory programming jargon, Bernie DeKoven. It's just like a garden of like inside jokes, just like forms. It's just like a natural response to just like make jokes. So at the time in 2012, 2013, make your own play was like a funny like state of games joke at the time. It's like, like a Dadaist approach. There's like anything can be games. Wow, walking sims were still controversial. So Rooftop Cop kind of started as like a joke board game, actually. It was just like a picture of a guy punching people on a roof, and in the box was just like this ratty piece of green construction paper and like a purple cube and a Sharpie or something, which was like funny enough. That's like a good couple minutes of like laughs. But we continued riffing on like other stuff every once in a while. Rooftop Cop teaches typing would have been good. There was a rhythm game at some point called like On the Beat. What was another good one? There was like a dystopian gardening game, Rooftop Crops. Rooftop Quap, we did that too. Bennett wasn't faculty yet, so this was a good joke. Anyway, so I was in an advisor meeting with Frank Lance, talking about some thesis ideas. This was the end of my first year. And I can't even remember what those thesis ideas were at the time. But I remember recounting this, like some of these jokes, like at least a little bit. And I must have mentioned the name anyway. And I'm going on about something else. And Frank is just like looking out the window, like wistfully. And he's like, tell me more about Rooftop Cop. And I'm like, I don't know. It's just some jokes. I don't know. So I somehow rallied like 6 or 7. Do you remember 6 or 7? I don't know, something like that. Other MFAs into like making as many games as possible by the following May. We're just like, oh, this is going to be great. We're just going to make as many crappy things as we can by May. And then we're going to skin them all as Rooftop Cop games. And then it's going to be presented as this like oversaturated brand catastrophe. Like if the Atari crash had been like caused by like one franchise or something like that. This is maybe like an accidental glimpse into like Disney or like Marvel. Maybe it's just kind of like the singularity. So anyway, one by one, people dropped out of the group to pursue their own interests as it happens. And by December, it was just me, all alone. And up to that point, I'd only been working on one game. This is all I had. It was the first thing I'd ever programmed on my own. And it was a mess. It was like an RTS with moving tiles. Don't ever do that. Don't ever try to make a pathfinding game with moving tiles. And it was like about police, I thought. I don't know. And they were on a raft. And it was like floating through a city. Frank kept calling it Stark Raft. I didn't know what I was doing. So it was kind of evocative, though. I didn't really know where I was headed. And I still liked the original idea, but there was like no way I was going to, you know what I mean? I'm not going to make a ton of games. Like that original idea just probably wasn't going to happen. So then over break, I think, between the 2 semesters, I played Crime Zone by the Catamites, finally. And it all made sense. So in Crime Zone, you play as like a multitude of indistinct police officers. It's just like an adventure studio game. And at some point, you can find your way onto this elevator, and it's stuffed with other cops. And you take it to the roof, and you look out over the city, and you see all the cops on all the other roofs, and it's like a sense of warmth washes over you. And it's like, you need to piss. And then in Bennett Fadi's prototype studio class, we had to make one game every week. I did that. And some of them just felt like they fit with this raft situation in spirit. And so I picked those 4, and that's the final collection. They did not change, I want to be honest, they did not change that much from those 1-week prototypes. I think I changed some sprites. But mostly, so it can be done. So most of the things that I talked about here now were realizations that came after I'd finished all of this stuff. I want to make that clear. I was thinking about stuff, I didn't really know how to make sense of it, right? The original release date for this game, like officially, was after the incubator program over the summer, that also at NYU. So the original release date was September 5th, I think, of 2014. And the previous month had been both Ferguson and Gamergate. And I was like doing this. It did not feel good. It was like tiny police and wet buildings, and I just kind of felt like an idiot. So as a result, I spent a lot of time reading and thinking and listening and trying to like situate this stuff within context. How can I make sense of this and maybe do better in the future? Because when making things, the fear is often articulated as like, I don't know what I'm doing, or something, And the answer you often hear to that is, no one does. You can do whatever you want. But that's not true. That's not true. You can't like completely know what you're doing, but you can know what you've done. And that builds like an inner trust, I think. So I'd say that like examining what you've done and being able to talk about it and connect it with the world and its material history is the only path to knowing what you're doing. And knowing what you're doing and why will keep you from becoming a cop. Thanks. Oh yeah, Q&A, my favorite part.
Hello.
Just give me the easy ones.
I don't know what are easy ones, but thank you so much for such a great talk. I think the final thing you said it rings so true. I think especially for I think it's such an important thing to hear for students, is to not be a cop.
Are you aspiring cops?
I feel like that's the sign of making corrupt work is when you're so obsessed with the thing that you're making, gaining capital or making profit or something, so that you kind of end up making boring or offensive work or something like that.
Well, yeah, I think I'm going to get my water.
Of course, yeah.
I think it's mostly just, I think you should think about it afterwards and just make sure that it actually fits your values. I don't know. It can't just be all reactionary art,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think we talked about this kind of off mic before, but if you had to hint at, or I guess subtweet or something, what are some of the things that I feel growing artists could look out for?
Are you trying to get me to talk about Grimes?
Sorry?
Are you trying to get me to talk about Grimes?
No. Just signs of what are some things that I feel are easy avoidance when making thesis work, for example, not to fall into some of these traps?
I don't know. I mean, I guess just think about the way that people are actually interacting with your systems, because you are designing systems. It can't just be all. It's not all just the story that you're telling. It's not all just the narrative, right? So the things that you're saying through. The systems that you design, especially in simulation games and things like that, when the id or it all comes out, there's no way to avoid that, because a lot of assumptions are made in the way that things are designed and programmed, and those show up later. And if you aren't examining them as you go, it could be bad.
Yeah. So I have a couple questions, and then we're going to open it up to the group. First of which is something that I just noticed while I was I guess I remembered as I was watching your talk is the fact that like out of all the titles for your games, I think one of them is styled differently. Like God Bless Everyone, it's like Bless it has one S and then everyone's like upside down.
Yeah,
the reason why only that game is.
Yeah, it's not a typo, it's real.
I remember, yeah.
Yeah, so that one actually has like a very specific genesis point because it was the first one we started on, and I used to take the J train. Well, I mean, I still do, but to school and back every time. And there's a specific spot on the south side of the Williamsburg Bridge on the J. If you look out, there's like right as you're entering Brooklyn, if you're looking out onto the buildings, like when you get across the water, there's a series of rooftops, and one of them says, God bless everyone, written exactly like that, with one S and an upside down everyone. And I was listening to some like One of Tricks Point Never song with like water sounds in it, and I was like going over the bridge and I was looking at this roof, and it was just like, that the whole game just kind of appeared in that moment, and then I just was like, oh, I'll make this now. Yeah, so that's where that came from.
Not how that works usually.
Yeah. Sometimes.
You've talked a little bit about like the, I guess in like mid of your presentation, talking about some of the systems in the games and how you've like purposefully defied some like good or standardized programming like rules, I guess, for the sake of. Did you ever feel like the need, I guess now you talk about it because it's a retrospective, but at the time, did you ever feel the need to like responsibilize your readers or players talking about some of these themes that you have that are hidden in the game? Like you have some code or like function that like works perfectly, but is like never called, for example. And you have like memory leaks and things like that to talk about, I guess like politics of code or like crunch culture or all of that basic theme of doing that stuff. Did you ever feel a need to talk about that at the time?
Not really, but I'm mostly because, I mean, the reason that I know about the Slave of God thing is because somebody wrote about it. They opened it up, and Ansh, I think, wrote about it. And like opened it up and like looked through it and found that and then wrote about it. So this is me writing about it, basically, this talk. Is that like that stuff is like not obvious, but it's like it felt like spiritually necessary to include that stuff. Like that's just like what I was thinking about and interested in at the time was like, I mean, I looked at that code a lot, like for many hours, and so you start to put little like things in there for yourself, you know. So like the birds, I think I mentioned to you before.
Were there any that you forgot and then maybe you reopened at some point recently and was like, oh yeah. Like,
I still don't know what happened to the birds. There were birds in this raft game, I swear. I made a sprite. I got them like they flapped. They're supposed to take things off the raft. There's even like a weird scarecrow in the game that I made to keep the birds away. That's like why it's there. Because I was like, well, the birds just can't. They can't just keep coming and taking things. So I was like, well, I'll just make a thing that scares them away. But now there's just no birds in the game. I don't know what happened to them.
Like a bird police, but then there's nothing to police because there's no birds.
Yeah. They just left. They're like, no.
Do you do these kind of like Easter eggs for all of your games? Do you find, or like? Was this a special occasion?
I don't know. I mean, kind of. Maybe not in Witchball. There's like a lot of like leftover stuff that's like just for me, but it wasn't as like it wasn't as purposeful as this one, because that was like really something I was thinking about, because it was going to be like a sculptural thing, and I wanted it to be like that to be part of it. Whereas like something like Witchball was like for a public event to be played. So most of that, the importance was on like people playing it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of like sculptural work, you talked a little bit about what makes a game sculptural and what not. Do you want to elaborate on that in any way? Or?
I mean, I don't want to be like prescriptive or anything, but it occurred to me that it felt like sculpture because none of the games change over time. You're not unlocking things. Like, it's literally the moment you open it up, it's the same as if you had sat there for like hours sort of. I mean, some things might accumulate on screen or whatever, but it's not going to change.
Like it exists without you, kind of. It runs without you, kind of.
Yeah. And the original version of that Capture the Flag game was supposed to take 24 hours, but it could. I just have to change some numbers, but it doesn't.
Right. So you've thought about like the stuff and read about and wrote about the stuff a lot, and I've played a lot of games that have cops in it, and I played as a cop, I guess. And I think like police have been like mechanically very important in a lot of video games. The thing that I've never really felt, even at playing police in games, is like I am actually doing a lot of policing. The thing that is really evocative about your game of cop-like or cultish behavior is like the language that you use. I think some of the verbs, as well as like some of the words on the UI, I think like citations and deficits and things like that. Do you want to talk about your thought process behind choosing some of those words?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a writer. I'm like a writer last. It's like my weakest thing. It's like the thing I have like the least confidence in. Yeah, so I try to use as few words as possible, but I do really like flavored text. I just like, it's fun. So I try to make everything kind of like that, like one word, maybe three at most. When I have to use it, I just use a lot of like policing language, and it just sort of make like the thing is you repeat these words like over and over and over, they kind of like lose their meaning. So I was just imagining like they're still just doing this stuff like over and over forever, not even knowing like where it came from. It's just this kind of like habitual like ritual behavior. We have to go over here and take all these things and move them to this place or whatever, and this is called evidence, and who knows what that word means, but stuff like that, I think. Does that answer the question?
And like a lot of words that like cops use to, I guess, justify some of these like acts. I think, for example, like there are like court cases in which like
the ComStat stuff, or the stop and frisk thing where they caught all basically the cops got they basically got them by telling them in court to define the word furtively. Because they kept saying, they're like, why'd you stop this guy or whatever? And they're like, well, he was acting furtively. And they asked all these, like 15 cops, they're just like, define furtively, and none of them could do it. And so, so it's stuff like that, I think.
Were they just told to use the word?
Yeah. Just like, this will get you out, don't worry. Just use this word.
Right. So you kind of quote Ursula Le Guin basically to talk about good sci-fi or bad sci-fi. In your words, Rooftop Cop counts as I don't agree, but bad sci-fi or like obvious sci-fi. But if that's the case, what would you say is like a good or exciting sci-fi that you've read recently that excited you?
That book? I don't know. I mean, I read a lot of Octavia Butler short stories recently that are all very good. They do that. They're good at that sort of stuff.
Could you describe one?
I'm trying to think. There's one with like I think it's called Amnesty or something. It's just like these plant-like aliens, and they're really like enfolding humans. They're like hugging them basically, and they're like extremely powerful. There's no way to stop them, and so all of human society is structured around being hugged by these plants. There's more to it, but it just keeps going from there. But that's just like So I'm saying that Rooftop Cop wasn't supposed to be like I'm making a sci-fi thing or whatever, but it is literally extrapolation. It's just like, here are these two things. What if forever?
No, but I think it is doing that in word, but not in spirit. Like I don't think you're doing the easy thing of like a Black Mirror episode about cops or something. I think you're doing the hard truth thing of talking about the job itself. Like I feel like it's easy to say like, oh, the job is broken, and so cops 100 years from now is going to be broken but worse or something. I think the thing that you're actually doing is like the job is like an uglier thing, which is like a bit more of an animal instinct, because I feel like it's in human nature to want to keep stuff and like mine stuff and like build walls around stuff. I think that's what you're talking about, where
I don't think it is. I think that's not even...
But like, I think you're transforming the job of a cop to be like, what if it's like a general AI that is like doing like instrumental conversions or something forever of like just wanting to believe stuff. And I think that is like a big, step away from like cops 100 years from now. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll take that. Thank you.
What else? I think that's all the questions I have. Anyone else? Anyone want to ask some questions for Steph? I'm going to move these.
You get a mic.
Hey, thanks so much. That was a great presentation. I was thinking about the game on the beach and then the glacier game, and also that Ursula Le Guin quote you had, where she kind of like takes sci-fi to task there. And in the glacier game and the beach game, you have somebody just kind of repeating this repetitive, meaningless task as the entire environment and world around them collapses. But you're just this atomized individual kind of repeating the same meaningless gesture to busy yourself because there's no other control that you have. And it's kind of struck me that that's how a detractor would also describe what a video game is. And I was wondering how you see, because I would imagine that what you would see to the solution of this dynamic of cops and environmental degradation is sort of what you were discussing earlier, seizing the means of production, people coming together as a working class to retake what's theirs. And how do you see video games as fitting into that paradigm as opposed to further atomizing people and distracting them?
Yeah, that's tricky, right? But I do. So there's this weird thing that happens among not just video game people, obviously, like lots of artists or whatever, that they're like, well, why am I making art or when I should be out here organizing or should be doing direct action and things like that. And I remember actually Liz tweeting something to the effect of like, you can't just abandon your like art practice to go do direct action, because then the only art that exists is reactionary, right? The world it's like just a world of Grimes. So, yeah. So I think that you have to keep making things that have that in mind. That's kind of what I was talking about, was just like examine this stuff while you're doing it, and if that's in your like heart and mind while you're making it, and it's there for people to encounter, that is good, right? So, and not everyone engages with every medium, right? So some people read books, but they don't really like movies. Some people, watch anime only. So somebody's got to make the anime about this stuff, right? So it's good to have, it's good to have it in lots of different mediums.
I just have a quick question. If you you mentioned Slave of God, the Ink Reparo game, and also Crime Zone as sort of being inspirations. If you had to recommend to students maybe a game like your game, like Rooftop Cop, that's maybe more abstract, experimental, or whatever, that they might not have heard before, or that you think that they should play, what's like one game that you would recommend?
Only one?
Or a couple.
Well, first of all, you should play Problematic.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Black Room and Oikospiel are the two games that come to mind right away when I think of games that are just doing what feel like new things with the medium, but are also like class conscious, right? They're like they know what the medium is. Especially Oikospiel, it's an opera about labor using dogs, and assets and scripts and things that are all it's a collage of other people's work, but that's what it's about. So I guess if I had to pick one, Oikospiel, yeah.
I don't know if I heard you correctly, but at one point, like in passing, you said that when making a simulation, like your id comes out or something. Did I hear
I don't know
that
if that's the
correctly?
right word. Maybe. What?
Oh, never mind.
Continue.
You were saying like something about the mechanics that you design make statements about the like assumptions that you have about how things work, or like you're communicating something with the mechanics of your game or the thing you make, and when you make a simulation, like I don't know, maybe I heard that incorrectly, but could you like maybe talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just give you an example. There's this game called RimWorld, which is like a simulation game. It's pretty good, but all the little characters they can have up to 4 like traits, right? And they're like slots, so you can only have up to 4, right? One of those traits in the base game is gay, so it's like a thing you can have instead of likes rain or prefers to be underground or wakes up early, right? That's like, you know what I mean? Like that's what I'm saying. Like for the designer, like that made sense. You know what I mean? So you're like, your worldview comes out in these systems that you design, and you should pay attention to that. Does that help explain that? Yeah.
So I kind of, is that working? Okay. So I kind of noticed that for all of your games, it has a kind of zoomed out like view. Pretty much none of them are kind of like personal. Is that like a stylistic choice, or was it something subconscious, or like does it have like more meaning to you to have like that?
I think it's both. I sometimes refer to it as white distance. It's because it's removed. I mean, it's a very white U.S. New York City person. That's my perspective. But it was also based on my skills as like a person who could only draw things that were like 8x8 pixels. It's really easy to make things look like they're moving. This morning I made Robert Yang try to guess how many frames of animation were in some of the walk cycles, and like that tiny one with like 8, it was like 8 pixels tall, it was 22 frames for like no reason. I don't know. I just kept going, and then I was like, it looks good. It does. It looks kind of cool. It looks like he's walking.
Hey, thanks for the talk. I feel like a ongoing sort of motif in all the pieces is just sort of like the relationship of the audience with time. That like, notably with like the Glacier one, like you said, it was supposed to be like 24 hours originally to play through it, and I'm guessing it's like just a practical limitation that you had to succumb to eventually. Like, what was just sort of your thought process? Like, there are some that are like faster, like the apartment stealing stuff one is like actually pretty fast paced, and like what is sort of the desired like effect of it, like the relationship of the audience with that like different nature of time?
That's kind of funny to think about. I mean, I mostly gravitate towards slow, quiet games, not like on purpose. It's just what ends up being kind of what I make. I guess I'm sort of slow and quiet. But the reason that a lot of those so they were all made for different prompts in one class. So the prompt, if I remember right from that particular, the apartment one, was crash or crash through. So that's what I was working with. It was like a mechanical prompt. So it just, I made like 12 games in that class, and they're varying different like, speeds and styles, and I kind of like every kind of game. So I was trying to make as many different kinds as I could for fun. And those are all the ones that like, they still have the same spirit, but yeah, they're like a lot, most of them were slow, but that one in the middle is kind of like, it's like a good, what's it called? Palette cleanser. Yeah. Something when you're making an album or something.
The loud song or something.
Yeah, there's also an album of music that I made that summer, so that's pretty cool. You should listen to that.
Thanks, Steph. You or Winnie mentioned the death positivity as one of the themes that was in the game, but when I play it, it feels not so positive. It feels kind of desperate.
I'm sorry, Dylan.
In a good way. But I'm wondering where you see that being a part of the theme and kind of your reflections on that idea.
I guess it's a little, so that sort of came after. That's kind of some of my newer stuff, I think. Shows up more there. But for this one, I was thinking a lot about like the idea of like a slow apocalypse, which is just like people are just going to keep finding ways to have fun, like no matter what. Like things are just going to maybe, either they only just keep getting worse. People are still going to like make play. They're going to move sticks around on the beach or whatever. So I don't know. That sort of feels hopeful, but also kind of not, because it's like it enables it, but also you kind of have to have fun. So I don't know. I hope that helps you.
Hello, what's up?
Hey.
Your concept of white distance is really interesting to me, and it's seems indicative of a lot of, I don't know, it feels like a term that could be applied to the whole of video gaming right now, in a certain way. I think it's the way that in which people participate in it is perhaps a little different. Because I don't know, as you're here talking about your ideas and your concepts with video games, I go back and I think of, and this is something that I've thought of for a long time, but I think of games that I played as a kid, like Lethal Enforcers, where the controller is literally a police revolver that came in a gun case that I would have to go rent at Blockbuster, and I would rent that game basically like every week. And now I'm a person that goes around documenting cases of police brutality, and it's like such a weird like switch up that it's like you're one of the few people that I've heard making the counterpoint to that work. I don't know exactly what I'm getting at, but I think the work that you're making is really important. Your perspective is, I think, unique, and I don't know. I wonder what your views are on white distance as a whole, as applied to video gaming, particularly from the developer side. What you see from your peers and what you've maybe seen historically within video gaming. Maybe you could zoom in on particularly the use of cops in policing to make it a little bit more narrow.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure how to. Thanks, but I'm not totally sure how to respond to that. But I did, like, literally the first image in the game is like you're looking out a window at something happening. It's not happening like, you know what I mean? Like you're sort of like implicated by your distance. So yeah, it maintains that distance like the whole time. Like the closest you get to the character is like when you're stealing stuff from people, you know? So yeah, I don't really know. It's just we can talk later. I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a good answer for that, but it is something that I think about all the time, obviously.
Does anyone else have a question? Oh, okay, sure.
Yeah, I thought your closing statement about knowing what you've done and what you're doing, and that's how you avoid being a cop, was very powerful. And I think what's interesting from sort of the philosophy behind this game that you were discussing is that being a cop, I mean, there's the literal actually being a police officer, but it also, like, being a cop is a metaphysical relationship you have with, like, your peers in the universe. And, I think, like, even in political discussions, it's very interesting where sometimes one person will be discussing the kinds of policies or the kinds of society they want to live in, and another person will be discussing who they think should be in charge. And I think I'd like to hear sort of you elaborate a little bit on, and you brought up Grimes a lot, and I think like Grimes is a great example. But what in life, who are the cops you encounter? What is the difference between?
I put pictures of them.
Well, what was that?
Nothing. What do you mean?
In terms of like, if not aside from like a literal police officer, but somebody who is like actively engaged in perpetuating the system, from what would separate just like a lay person from being opposed to the system to being a cop?
I mean, I think it's just if you're not like antagonizing it, then you're like you're complicit in a way, right? So, I don't know, pretending that there aren't politics involved in games or making or art or whatever, or pretending that you can just sort of like set it aside for a moment, or like let's just ignore it when we're in this room, or from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. we don't do politics, because I mean a system like capitalism is like it's hands off the wheel already. It just that's just when you decide not to do anything. It just keeps going, and I think that's why probably like. Anytime you see like socialists or whatever in any sort of television show, they're always just like reading or like discussing or like saying stupid big words at each other. But it's because it takes a lot of stupid big words to like to do anything. It takes a lot of effort to make that change. Whereas something like being a cop or engaging in capitalism doesn't really take any effort because it's already there. It's already happening. You just kind of have to like, So I guess that. Does that help? Thanks.
Anyone else? Oh. Charles. Yeah, do you want to steer?
Yeah.
It's interesting because so much of your presentation is obviously your critique of the police, which I think is totally fair. But it's also interesting because when I play this game, I don't feel that critique as much as it seems like you feel it, right? Like there is such a somberness and distance and almost kind of like I think that your style is being extremely empathetic, right? And so you end up having this empathy for these people that are trapped in these rituals, that are trapped in these forms that they don't know how to get out of because it's the only structure they still have. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because it doesn't necessarily feel like if I was imagining a game that is about a critique of the police, this would make me feel like, oh, the police are also stuck in this crazy dying system like the rest of us. And like, yes, they're aggressive, and yes, they're doing things that are bad, but you're putting us in the shoes of why you would do that, like why you would be in that position, because you can't get out of the system. You're stuck in it with everyone else. I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's just a valid critique, and at the time I goofed or something. But no, yeah. But I mean, it's not so much that you're supposed to, empathize with the police. I actually ran into that problem. I was talking to a journalist at the Incubator show, and I think I said something about, oh God, I don't even know, it's like to the effect of like the cops are people too or something like that, and I didn't mean it as like empathize with them. I meant like, what the fuck are they doing, kind of thing. Like you're a human being. Like why are you doing this? And they just their energy flipped, and I think that they saw it that way. It was just like, oh, now they misunderstood or something. But. Yeah, I mean, you can, like, so for example, in like the third one, we were just like running back and forth, stealing things from people's rooms. Like, I guess you're kind of empathizing with the cop, but what they're doing is also kind of shitty, right? Like, yeah, that's true.
The rest of them are very much.
Yeah.
You're in this system with the police officers. And you don't have a way out. I don't think, right? Like, the identification is basically
Yeah, it's true. But I mean, it's a really weird sort of empathy, because if you do follow the timeline, like there are people like maybe, I don't know, being born and living and dying on this beach, not knowing anything, and it's like it's not really their fault. Like they're not to blame, but they are part of like this weird class lineage of like oppressors. So. I mean, this is what I am, basically, right? So I don't know. I just had to make a game from my own perspective, I think, is what I did. Oops.
I think my experience playing it, and I might be also not reading it or reading it in a personal sense. But the critical aspect of the game, and that has both empathetical and critical takes on police, is like just the idea that it's not an intellectual act that they're doing. Which is something that I never really think about. And like, the way like they advertise the job is very like a sense of duty, right? It's a very like noble, thoughtful thing. The thing that this game illuminates, I think, is that it's more of like a behavioral or fanaticism. It's like something that's like harder to justify because it's like innate and something that's like really, biological almost. So in that sense, it's like both empathetic and sympathetic, but also kind of mind-blowing that like actually it's not something that's coming out of any duteous act or love for the people. Yeah, but yeah, that's the thing. It's like just they are trapped, but that's not from a place of nobility or anything like that. Cool. Anyone else? Yeah.
This is such a good line of discussion. I want like the way that I was like reading the sort of experience of like being in that situation of like embodying the cop. Like it's easy to like empathize just because you're put in those shoes, but what it demands you to question is like, why are there only cops left? Like in the end of the world and there's like nothing left but like, despair and cops. Like why are the cops the ones that made it? It's like complicity in like the destruction of everything else by their survival almost. Like that's just how I read it. And like I don't know if that was part of like the way you were building it. Is that like
I mean a little bit, because I mean that's right. Like when I was talking about the logical end of capitalism is that like you run out of exploited people and then you start like the haves start becoming have-nots until like it just becomes this tiny subgroup of cops. That's the only thing left, right? So something metaphysical cops, that kind. Angelical cops. I'm sorry.
I just have a final question before we end. So it's like a 5 years retrospective, you're 5 years out, which is a very unique perspective, I think. A lot has happened. A lot has changed in the world and in you in the last 5 years, probably. How do you think this game has fared since its, I guess, birth, 5 years ago? As a sculptural work, maybe, or as just your baby?
Yeah. I still like it. I like it more now than I did then, I think. And part of it was this process of just like needing to make sense. Yeah, make sense of it, I think, is good. It definitely helped me figure out what else I wanted to do or make or whatever. So it was useful in that regard. So.
Thank you so much, Steph, for such a great illuminating talk.
Thanks for coming.
Applause.